everybody, and welcome to Table Talk.
Hello,
I'm
everyone.
Heather Newton, and I'm joined by one of our co-hosts, Michael Wostbrock. This is our last Table Talk for a little while on Twitch, so we're rounding it out with 4-player games and before we go on hiatus for the summer. So
That's
thanks
right,
for joining
summer
me,
break.
Michael. Yeah.
Glad to be here.
And we have it's on hard mode today. 4-player games is difficult for me, at least, because 4-player is not my mode. 2-player is my mode, I would say, in my house.
It's also a very broad topic. If you filter down for games that play up to 4 players on BGGs, or really any list of games on a site, you'll find tens of thousands of responses. And then there's a small subgenre of those games that are only for 4 players. And there's actually not very many there at all. So it's both far too broad to categorize, and then also very, very narrow if you try and filter it down to just 4-player games. I looked in my closet, and I don't have any like printed games that are exclusively 4 players. But we did have some stuff that we thought we could talk about. And also, this is the third time I think we have had a player count as a discussion topic. And so I kind of want to unpack that too. Like, what do different player counts mean? How do you design for a specific player count in mind as a designer or as a player? What do you think about? Because I think there's some interesting decisions there in how you make a game and make sure that it scales for different players and how that matters. So yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah, we're gonna focus more on best at 4 rather than only works at 4. To make a little bit more sense, I guess. And this will also be this is the last player count that's on our bingo cards anyway. And if you're playing at Protospiel Online, 2-player means you played with 2-player. 3-player means you played with 3-player. It doesn't mean a game that can play at that or that only can play at that. It just means a game you played with that many people. So it can be also more broad as we talk about what it's like to do that.
Yeah. So we've got a couple games to talk about. I have one game that I think works really well at 4 players, and it's a pretty simple game. So I also wanted to use it as a teaching moment for why player counts matter with mechanics and design. I think we've touched on that some on the 2-player game discussion, where some games felt like ganging up with 2 players, but they felt good with 3, etc. I thought we could do that some more. Did you have a game physically that you wanted to talk about that was played well at 4 players as well?
Yeah, I have 2 here that are actually in my collection that I can show on camera, but I also have some things queued up on BGG to screen share.
Yeah, and beyond that, just I had like the broad topic of card games as well, because a lot of traditional card games, and in my experience, I actually did a side project on like old 52, 54 card games. I tried to create an anthology of games that people play with the standard deck of cards, and collect people's stories around those games as well.
Like, are you saying you were hoping to write an actual book, or just for your own benefit?
What to call it? I guess it's a product, but I don't know if anyone would buy it. But it's something I made just to make because I like games. I wonder if I have it sitting around. I might be able to find it. But it was basically, the idea was my own version of like a Hoyle's board game book, like a collection of rules for classic games. But instead of it being an exhaustive list of all games of a certain category, it was going to be games and the rules and the memories connected to them by friends and family and people that I interviewed. So like, this is the game Kemps. This is how you play it, both from an interview with my brother-in-law, who played it a lot as a kid with his family from overseas, and then like blending that with other online sources to make sure that the rules aren't completely wrong. And then like, why does this game matter to him? What memories does this bring up with him playing it with his family? And so yeah, I have like 9 or 10 classic card games. And the idea was you'd put these things in a box, and then you just add cards. And so you could play these games the way that people remembered them, games that were special to people, and all you needed to do was provide the deck of cards. So I don't know if that's really a product, but it was the thing I wanted to make. And it got me thinking a lot about old card games. And a lot of those games are best at or were designed exclusively for 4 players, which seems relevant to today's topic.
Yeah, totally.
So you want to jump in and start with one of the 2 games that you had first, since you've got 2?
Yeah, sure. So there's one that I can't remember if I've shown it to you before, because I know I've had it here for 2-player and abstract before, but I feel like I kept running out of time for it. So maybe I've showed you this before, and maybe it's new. This war chess game, is this new to you?
Let's see. I don't think I've seen that yet. No.
Okay.
Yeah,
Then
I
I guess I didn't
on the stream.
Quite manage to show it. So it is a really neat production, a magnetic box. Whoa. And it's a bag building game, but it's an abstract too. So it has these really nice bags and all these really nice poker chip, like there's a board in here too, but all these poker chips with different symbols on them that you can, they each have a different, so there's like a card that goes with each one. They all have different rules for attacking each other. So it's sort of chess-like. That's why I would say it's an abstract. And it can be played at either 2 or 4.
But not 3.
But not 3.
Why not 3?
Because it's 2 sides. It's like chess. There's 2 sides of a war. But this one is designed in a way that you can play in teams. So it can be like if me and Will were on a team, and we were playing you and Jay. Yeah, I would go, you would go, Will would go, Jay would go, etc. Kind of like bridge.
Okay. So what makes you?
We have the 2 teams. I think they're the Wolves and the Falcons or Eagles. So we have like gold and silver team, and then our pieces are allocated to those teams, and it's kind of like a capture the flag situation. We're trying to capture and hold bases on the playing board. Yeah.
What makes you think that or feel like the game is better on the team version with 4 players than in the 1v1?
I don't know if I would go like strongly so far as to say better, like that it's not good at 2, but I guess memories wise, the first time I played it, it was at 4-player at a convention, and then actually didn't try it 2-player before we bought it because I liked it at 4-player, just knowing we could play it 2-player. And it's nice to be able to have just more people involved. It's nice that they figured out a way to make this two-sided abstract work with 4 people. And it has been much longer since I played it with 4, of course. But I remember it was fun to have like a teammate and trash talk against the other team playing this game. Yeah.
I think I like that it's blending competitive and cooperative in the same, into the same game. Because I think there's good elements from both of those. And so, it made a team sport. That would be a good subcategory. It would be team-based games.
I think that's on our list, but way further down the alphabet.
Way further down. I played one of those recently called Make It Happen, which was the game design winner. It was the gift that they gave us at Geekway, and I think it was the contest winner of like 2021 or 2020. But it's a game for 2 to 14 players. But it's 2 teams, and so at its core, it's a 2-player game. But it can be 2 teams of 7 or 2 teams of 1, and it scales up that way. But that was fun. I liked the team aspect, even though it wasn't at all required for the gameplay. It was more fun playing it alongside somebody else. So that might be one thing.
Yeah, and I guess the thing about War Chess 2 playing at 4-player is that I'm afraid I might slightly misspeak, but you have all those different chips and they can move and do different things. I'm pretty sure when you're playing as a team, like I have my own types of units and my teammate has a different set of like 3 or 4 types of units. And so we have to work together. Like I have to set my teammate up, do a thing, let the other team make one move, and hope, that my teammate can see what I'm setting them up for. And I don't think you can. I guess you could. I don't know that there are rules against saying out loud what you're doing, but obviously if you say it, you're giving it completely away to the other team about what they need to defend or stop you from doing.
Andy
So,
Jewell, who is a Protospiel long timer, you know Andy is a designer. I've played a game of his, at least 2 Protospiels, that has a single player, a 2-player, and a 4-player mode. And I enjoy the 4-player mode the best by far for exactly the reason you described. In 4 players, it is a team of 2 versus another team of 2, and it's you go, they go, your partner goes, their partner goes. And so the teams and the partners are alternating. And there's this tension where you want your partner to understand your intent, but you can't just speak it out loud because then your masterful team plan is given away. So you're kind of speaking in half code, like if we go, so maybe if you go there, then you're kind of looking to see if they're paying attention, and that's a lot of fun. I have not played a ton of games that leverage that dynamic to make it a 4-player game, but I really enjoy that. I like the 2v2 feel a lot.
Mm-hmm. And I mentioned Cerebria before at 3-player, and it's also this way. I have not tried it at 4-player though. I just know that it's more like the 2-player, but it's I go, opponent goes, my teammate goes, their teammate goes. Yeah,
I think that's a lot of fun. That is not a design space that I've explored at all. Never even considered making a game with that type of team split, but now I want to, because that's something I haven't tried, and I love learning new things, and it also pushes me to try a bunch of things when I want to understand a mechanic better. Like when I wanted to make a roll and write, I went to try and go play a bunch of roll and writes, and the same thing for a dice based push your luck game. So that's always fun. It's fun to go explore a new area of design and game.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting to talk about different player counts, what works where, because if you extrapolate this further to a 6-player game where you're doing this, where you're like 2 teams of 3 and it's every other, it probably would just take too long before it was your turn.
I think you're right.
It'd be frustrating.
There may be a game out there that proves us wrong, but I think you're right. I think you have to think a lot about downtime and if you have anything to do when it's not your turn. An example of that, kind of a very casual one, but what's the party game where you pass around a little disc and it tells you a word, and it's like kind of like charades, you're trying to act it out without saying the name of it.
Catchphrase.
Yes, catchphrase. That's like that, right? 2 teams of various size, and it might be your turn after 7 or 8 people go, but the turns are so fast that it doesn't matter. So I guess that's the exception.
It is your turn though, every other person, because if you're not giving the clues, you're guessing the clues, right?
You're right. Okay, so your turns. The other thing it does is it makes turns fast, and it gives you something to do even when it's not your turn. You're engaged at all times.
Right.
All I've run into as a designer is not engaging players when it's not their turn.
That is a team game, I would say, like primarily, right? Catchphrase is.
I'd agree.
A team game. So, but it's a team game that does this 4-player rotation, more thinky game kind of thing. I think it's the only one I can really think of that works that way.
Probably, I would guess mostly only party games delve into that space of like really big teams with the handoff timer, because you need engagement the whole time and you need fast turns. But I'm sure there's examples to prove us wrong out in the big, exciting world of games.
Yeah, I guess hot potato, just like the very basic hot potato.
That's the same thing though, right? Your catchphrase is literally hot potato mixed with charades or something. Like you're trying to not end with the bomb in your hand.
Right, exactly.
Well, let me talk about a game that I really love that I don't think I've brought up. I definitely don't think I've shown it before. Machi Koro. I don't think I've showed it on the show.
Nope.
It's this game is like many games I own. It was a personal recommendation from a friend, and it's just good, clean game design. It is at its core, I'd say, an engine builder. The game is about on your turn, you are buying things to grow your city. So you'll buy little buildings like a cheese factory or a wheat field, and you're just growing this city. And for anyone that's played this game or Catan, or like, it uses a fairly familiar mechanic where the things that you buy give you return over time. I guess even Monopoly does that. So for example, if you get a wheat field, Hello, Baron von Scump. Welcome. We're talking about 4-player games and games that play really well at 4 players and why player counts matter. If you've got a favorite game that plays well at 4 players, definitely let us know and we'll talk about it or like to hear what you think.
Yeah.
So if you buy a wheat field, then and everyone rolls a dice on their turn, just like in Catan. Then if you buy a wheat field, it says whenever anyone rolls a 1, then, and that's what the 1 on top means. Or no, whenever one coin. No, it's the 1. Yeah, whenever anyone rolls a 1, you get a coin. So all the different things can generate resources based on people's dice rolls. And this works for 2 to 4 players. It's a really simple game. You try and buy more things that will get you more income over the course of the game, and you have to build like 4 special buildings to win. But what makes it different at different player counts is specifically the red cards. All the other cards say whenever you roll a die on your turn, you get something, or they say that's the green cards, and the blue cards say whenever anyone rolls a die and it gets a certain result, then you get income. And so none of those vary in how much the card is worth based on the player count, but the red cards do, because they're like attack cards. The red cards read some variation of this, which is get a coin from the player who rolled the die. And so if a player rolls a 3, you get a coin. Now, this is really simple game mechanics, but for new designers or people who haven't unpacked it, this kind of card works differently than the other two, because if it's a 2-player game, the amount of people rolling a die that aren't you per turn is one other person. So this has the same likelihood to give you 1 coin as something that gives you a coin when you roll it. But if there are 4 people in the game, then after you go, 3 other people roll. And so you've got 3 chances instead of 1 for a red card to trigger. To put it simply, cards that are good for you on other players' turns get better in value the more players there are in the game. I like this game because it teaches these fundamentals. Like, that's something that my 6-year-old daughter does not pick up on. But my 12-year-old nephew absolutely picks up on it, and he'll buy more of these when there are larger player counts. So
did you say that the cost is variable depending on the player count, or you're just saying the value is variable?
Correct.
Depending on the player count. Okay.
So the cost does not change. If it was a perfectly balanced game, the cost would change with player count. But it's not a perfectly balanced game. It's an intentionally basic fundamentals game. And so but the reason I think it works well at 4 players, or best at 4 players, is because if you do a little bit of like designy math on it, you'll see that the cards are balanced best for 4 players. And so, and I just think that's an interesting thing about the game. The person that made it, the designer, probably made it with the intent of it being a 4-player game. And then I'm sure they were fully aware that when you played at 3 or 2 players, those cards are no longer as good to buy. But they also realized that given the type of game and the audience, there's no need to overcomplicate it by tweaking it down. So I love how self-aware Machi Koro is on its design, on its simplicity. But I also like that as not just a player, but a designer, I've become familiar enough with games that I can see it was probably made with 4 players in mind. And so, yeah, that game comes to mind as a 4-player game because of that, because I get to see a little bit behind the veil and understand what the designer might have been thinking in that game. So, yeah, that's why I wanted to share that.
Yeah, that is interesting, because Machi Koro is a game that before Will and I really knew about Board Game Geek and were really part of the hobby, but we had just started finding things on Amazon and buying them. Sometimes we had Dominion, and Amazon knew we bought Dominion, so it would give us suggestions. Machi Koro was one that got on Will's radar, and we bought it, and I didn't like it, playing it just 2-player with him, and we've since sold it because of that. But now that you're saying this, I'm like, maybe I should try it at 4 players to make up my official mind.
I have evidence that it was not designed with 2 players in mind. That doesn't mean it doesn't play okay at 2 players, but
you can play it, but it's not.
But I can provide mathematical evidence that this game is designed for 4 players. And again, that's really fun for me to get to the level where I can see that. It's like a deeper appreciation of a hobby you care about. It's like when you can eat something at a restaurant and you've been learning how to cook for 8 years and you can recognize some of the obscure spices in there, it's like, oh, this is more fun for me because I can understand some of the minutia of what's going on behind the scenes.
Right, you can appreciate it more.
Baron has a comment here. Pinochle, am I saying that right?
Pinochle.
Pinochle. Oh, Pinochle. In my head, I always spelled that differently. Spelled it Peaknuckl. I've never played Pinochle. Have you?
No. So I play Pinochle with my family, and it's the first game that comes to mind as a 4-player game. I have, if I'm not mistaken, Baron von Scrump, Pinochle is the one that isn't a normal card deck, right? It has just 5s and face cards and stuff like that. You have to have a special deck or use a bunch of decks of cards to build a Pinochle deck. Am I right on that? Maybe you can tell me. But if so, it was something that my grandparents played, and so they had a ton of those decks in their house. And I believe it was after both of my grandparents had passed away that one of my cousins, so
go ahead,
you say, it's a 9, but A through 9, but 2 of each. Okay. Oh, so no face cards. Gosh. Is that what you're saying? No face cards. Interesting. Then it wasn't Pinochle. It was a deck that only had face cards. And my cousin thought it was a normal deck of cards. And we started playing, I guess I'm a little bit telling tales, but a drinking game. We could have been drinking water, though. Drinking water.
Sure.
And,
sure.
all face cards.
Out of water.
All face card. Okay. Okay. Oh, A through 9 down. Okay. Got ya.
Yeah, I'm
thinking of A as 1, right? So you confused me, but A as the high card. Ace is the high card. That makes sense. Yeah, so it had no numbers in it. And there's a drinking game where you just have a normal deck of cards. And so this is a party game. You draw a card and you, depending on what number it is, you make up a new rule that everybody has to play by. And we just kept getting jacks and kings. People were like, is that the 5th king? What's going on?
According to bicyclecards.com, which is a good a good repository for specifically 52, 54 card deck games. It is a card game for ages 18 plus, so you're not wrong to label it as a drinking game. And they actually,
Pinochle is?
Yeah, Pinochle is. You did spell it correctly, Baron. And and they listed as a 2-player game. So I'm curious how you played it with different variations. I mean, you probably just scaled it up so the rules worked for 4 players.
Or maybe you took 2 decks. You had to get 2 decks and shuffled them together, maybe?
Maybe so. But I think that kind of segues into what I was talking about with classic 52 card games, which is a lot of them, a lot of games were designed for either 2 or 4-player games. I was talking to Heather about this earlier. Games that I grew up playing when I was a kid, games like Kemp's, ERS, Hearts, Spades, Rook, what is it? Shanghai Rummy. Actually, that one scales way up more than 4 players. But a lot of those games were designed for 4 players. And Heather said, wait, I played Hearts, and Hearts was not a 4-player game. So I did some research, and you're right. Hearts is 3 to 5, I think, but it was designed as a 4-player game. If you play it with 3 players, you actually have to remove a card from the deck, the 2 of clubs, so that the player count cards work out. And the same is true if you want to play with 5 players. You have to remove another card. And so the reason, as far as I can understand it, that a lot of these 52 card deck games are designed around 4 players is because 13 cards, 4 suits, like the medium, the tools that you're working with split really cleanly into 2 or 4 player divisions. 26 cards for 2 players, 13 cards for 4 players. And so a lot of games revolve around, like a lot of trick takers start with deal every person 13 cards, and that splits 4 ways. And so because 52 card decks or 54 card decks with the jokers were like a ubiquitous game component for such a long time. They naturally created a lot of these games that were multiples of 2 or 4 players, because that's what the components were that people were working with. Same reason we see a lot of certain kinds of randomness in games from a really, really long time ago. And I'm way out of my league here. We don't have Jay to give us the history lesson. But dice are incredibly old and throwing bones, rolling bones for probabilities even older than that. So game mechanics and things like player counts can emerge from the components you're working with, which is why one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given as a game designer was to try to make games out of restrictions with your components. Like, say, hey, here's what I'm designing with, make a game with this. And once you have that game, maybe you can give yourself some flexibility and change the components, but start by constricting yourself. Do it all on one sheet of paper. Do it all with 4 dice. Do it all with these 7 weirdly shaped, geometric objects. Make a game from these components, and that can come up with a lot of different things based on those restrictions. Restrictions are good. They're useful.
They can make the outlook of creating something new feel less overwhelming, I think. They're a good practice starting point. So I want to know, Baron, to play Pinochle with 4 people, did you always have 2 decks? Because I know, again, my grandparents' closet, they had many decks of Pinochle cards, and they used to have, like, invite all the couples over and they'd play that. But so I wonder if that's why they had so many, is because one deck is only enough to play with 2 people. Just curious.
That may be right. While waiting for Baron to reply, that's what my grandparents did with the Shanghai Rummy. They were big bridge players, but they never played bridge with me as a kid. But they played a lot of Shanghai Rummy, and you need like 1 deck per 2 players for that game. And so they would just have this box of cards, and you would get out like 6 decks. It's time for everyone to play our 3-hour game of Shanghai Rummy. He says no. They say no. It was just 1 deck, and they modify the rules. And that's the great thing about games, is you can often be flexible with the rules and make them work for you, which is also the thing I was discovering in the anthology I was working on, which was everyone kind of has their own house rules for especially classic games. And there's nothing wrong with that. If I was doing an anthology on Pinochle, I would love to talk to someone, interview someone who played it with 4 players with a single deck, and how did they make that work and things like that. Apparently an entirely different game.
Are you saying when you looked up the rules, the normal 2-player rules, or everybody gets 24, or both players get 24 cards?
I think that's what it says. I haven't pulled up here.
At least on the official one you found when you Googled it anyway.
Yeah. And with these old games, there's sometimes not a single official version of the game too. But that's what things like the Hoyle's book of board games used to be. That used to be sources for like official rules to a game before there were internet online repositories. Well, now I want to know what the rules to Baron's game version of Pinochle were, because it sounds like there have been some variations.
Yeah, it might have been like your family's own, and they called it Pinochle because you're using a Pinochle deck,
Yeah, who knows? So anyway, that's kind of my side delve into classic card games, and just kind of following that curiosity I had into why are so many 4-player games from that set of mechanics, and and why does that work really well. So I think it's also because it's really great to invite another couple over. I think a lot of people play games with that exact thing in mind, where it's a household. There's often 2 people, 2 adults in a house, and they invite over their friends, and you've got 4 people. So that's a good player count. But I really appreciate that games now give us so much more flexibility than that. And there are games for 3 people, and games for 7 people, and games for 1 people.
Right. Very useful in the pandemic. So I guess these rules that Baron played by are somewhat official because you do find them pretty quickly on Google as the second result.
Gotcha. Yep.
So
what does Bicycle know? We don't know anything about cards. What's the other game, Heather, that you had in your collection that plays well at 4 players you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, this one, when I searched like for advice about good 4-player games, I saw Pandemic come up, and I think that I can speak to that. I've played a lot more Pandemic Legacy than regular Pandemic, but it's season 1 at least is the one that I've played, and the first game of season 1 at least is exactly like normal Pandemic, and then things start changing. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense that it's better at 4 players because you have more of the player powers to help you win the game. And I guess I would say, in a way, it's almost, even for basic Pandemic, maybe it's a little bit of a spoiler for me to say some things about strategy just for the vanilla roles that are in the game. But a lot of people will talk about the medic being super important. But we actually, in the group that I played with, we found the combo of the researcher and scientist more important, because the scientist, pretty sure it's the scientist only needs a set of 4 of the same color to cure a disease, and the researcher is able to pass cards more easily. So if they can be with those 2 being together in the same game, which already takes up 2 spaces for roles, makes it easier to get that set of colors, really can give you a big advantage. The medic is able to cure more disease cubes at once. So they're able to keep outbreaks from happening. They're good at that. But what you actually need to do, basically, you're trying to keep those things from happening before you do the thing to win the game, which is collect the cards to cure the diseases. And so the medic can cure things on their own, but the other players, it's kind of a synergy between their skill sets. And also there's another one called the dispatcher, which can make it so the researcher and scientist can be together in a city so they can exchange cards.
Yeah. Like you were saying,
medic helps you not lose, but the others help you win.
It keeps you alive long enough to get the solution. And it sounds like you're saying, in part, that it's more fun with 4 players because you get more interactivity between all those roles. Instead of it being this 1-2 combo, there's more interactions, more puzzles to solve, more ways to see how can all of these roles, looking for like combos, basically, or
more options to consider.
Yeah, and that's a lot of fun if a game is designed well to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and Pandemic Legacy, without giving story spoilers, part of the reason it's really fun is that the puzzle is longer and you can start putting upgrades on the characters. It is possible for a character to die. Like, that is a thing I'm telling you that's in the starter rule. Like, when you first open the rules and read, like, it's possible for a character to die. But so you also are balancing, like, I don't want to depend too much on this character because they might die. I don't want to put everything good on this one character. But because you have stickers and you're upgrading them, you can make synergies, even better synergies with these roles, make them related to each other in different ways that make it easier for them to interact or harder for them to interact. Yeah, so highly recommend Pandemic Legacy if you can get a chance to. The hardest thing about it is just being able to consistently get together with the same people to play it.
Yeah.
But it's worth it if you can figure out how to do it. It's I would say, the best Legacy game that I've played. I've also tried Charterstone, which I also like a lot. Seafall, which is okay. It's very thematically, it's very cool. It's a very cool production. But
I have one of my gamer groups includes my brother and sister-in-law, and they that was their take on Seafall too. They really, really cool, but they described, I've not played it, they described it as having a catch-up problem, where it's a legacy game you play over and over, from session to session. And they got like 4 sessions in, and there was a player who was so punishingly far behind that they felt like there was no chance in them to ever come back and catch up and win or have meaningful impact on the game. that's only one set of experiences. Is that
Right.
a complaint of yours with the game as well?
This is a game also where we played it 2-player, even though it explicitly said it's not. It doesn't even say it's for 2-player, but because it was going to be too much of a hassle, right? I found somebody saying you can make it work at 2-player, so I convinced myself, and I got it on deep discount, and just decided to get it out of extreme curiosity about it. And yeah, we found that we were having that problem with 2 people, though we were thinking, gosh, if there was a third, they like when somebody gets out too far ahead, 2 people would gang up, like we talked about in the 3-player, right?
Yep.
But I've heard people who played it at higher player counts also not too pleased with the results of it. It's the type of game it is, like the 4X.
It's a really hard design challenge.
Yeah, the 4X type of game. It's just like very complicated, and to Will, it started to feel like work. I actually would like to finish it just to find out like how the story arc goes, but it is, I don't know. I'm gonna have to find somebody else to sit in on it with me, because the person who started it with me is so bored and tired of it. Doesn't want to ever play it again. Not compelled, unfortunately. Yeah, it has a fun mechanic of these people called, oh gosh, advisors. Yeah, so you get to collect advisors that give you powers, and you're allowed to transfer one over each game to game, like save one that you had last time. And I find the advisor mechanic, that's probably my favorite part about that game. How that whole thing works is fun for me.
I used to think that 4X meant like a 4-player game. I wasn't in on this. Right. I wasn't in on the on the lingo, on the slang until someone used it in a context that wasn't a 4-player game, and I was like, I better ask a question. So for clarification, for anyone watching,
I always have a hard time remembering what all 4 of the X's stand for, but they're really EX. So it's a sound: exploration, exploitation.
Exterminate, I think, is one of them.
Extermination, and then
the gameplay style, not a number of players. It's like saying it's like saying an engine building game or a pick up and deliver game. It's a game about a certain type of mechanics working together.
Right.
What's hard about that game is that it is a competitive legacy game. Every legacy game that I've played, and I haven't played a ton because they have such a huge time investment, but they've all been to some level cooperative. I mean, even Gloomhaven, which is the stuff you gain for your character is exclusively for your character. You explicitly can't work together and trade resources. Like there's still very personal motives in that game. It is still at its core a cooperative game, and so you don't have to worry about someone getting way ahead and the other players feeling bad about it. So I don't know how you balance a game that's months long without a cooperative element to it. Honestly, that seems like a wild thing to take on to me.
It's explore, exploit, exterminate, and expand. We said explore, expand. So area control.
Yeah,
is part of it, but
this makes me think of like the old Age of Empires computer games, like that kind of thing, or or Star. Not Star Trek. Now I'm gonna draw a blank. Like the thing that Dota came out of.
Dota.
All right, I'm going into video game stuff now.
I'm not sure.
Anyway.
I've heard of Dota, but I haven't played it. But yeah, so and also like so it's resource gathering, it's uncovering areas of the map, resource gathering, and then fighting each other for control of space.
Yeah.
And yeah, the one that I've played that's a legacy game that is competitive is Charterstone. It's a worker placement legacy game. So in a way, you're like helping each other as you build things. It ends up being because when you change the board, what you're doing is you're creating more spaces for workers to go to. And you can also build over the top of spaces workers used to be able to go to. And you each have your own like kind of part of the map that you are allowed to add worker spaces to. And so you are helping other people when you build something, because it is making a new action, a new resource gathering opportunity available to them. So it was working out pretty well. pandemic very much interrupted us. The real life pandemic interrupted us, and
not the legacy game.
Didn't finish it. And you actually can play Charterstone with a really fancy app online. And I asked my friends, well, I'll pay for it if you'll play it with me. And they said it's just too discouraging that we got halfway through it and we'd have to start all over. Maybe if enough time passes, right?
We thought about that with Gloomhaven too. There's some really good mods. I think there was actually a professionally sponsored one on Tabletopia, or I don't remember, one of the simulators for Gloomhaven. But like you said, it was to start over was too much when you've invested invested tens of hours into a game. So we
and Charterstone goes up to 6, and it's best at 6 because you want to have. So there's an example of a best at 6 that I can think of.
Yeah.
Because if you only had 4 people, there'd be 2 sections of the board that weren't getting worker placement spots added to. So
that's ambitious. That's
I'd probably want to house rule it or something if I was playing with 4 too. Mm-hmm. Give people more sections of the board, play with more players at once. Yeah. Those were the only 2 physical ones. Bridge is a really common classic example that I feel like we should talk about, but I have never learned how to play Bridge. Have you?
Yeah. In all of my classic card game experience, I haven't played it. I can speak to Rook, which is related. And it's actually the same idea as Spades as well. And Bridge falls into the same category of a 4-player 2-team. I think Bridge is a trick-taking card game. Yeah. So the idea in all of these games, I think I'll speak to Rook because I've played it the most recently. I played it in Destin a lot with my nephew, and some brother-in-law and sister-in-law this spring. Rook is a game where you and a partner are trying to win tricks. So traditional trick-taking game means that all 4 players or all the players lay down a card. A certain card wins out of those 4 cards. Usually it's the biggest card, but there can be other special rules. And then often trick-taking games have some kind of trump suit where this suit automatically wins, either based on the suit that was led or some suit that's assigned for the game. So like in Spades, the trump suit is Spades. And in Rook, there's this wild card that serves like that as well. But the core idea of these games, and what makes it exclusively or best at a 4-player game, is the fun thing about the game is not the card counting. It's the unspoken, and there's very specific rules around table talk where you are trying to communicate ideas and intent to your partner while not telling your opponent. So it's actually really similar to what we talked about earlier on in the show, where a lot of what makes the game fun is that you and another person at the table have the same goal and you're trying to work together, but each of you only have half the information. I know it's in my hand, you know it's in your hand. And in Rook, and I believe also in many other 2-player or 2-team trick-taking games, at the very beginning, you have to make a decision. Oh, so Pinochle also in the 4-player variant is a trick-taking game. What's interesting about those games is at the start of each round, you have to look at your hand, you have to make eye contact with your partner, and you have to collectively say, this is how good our collective hand is, while only having half the information. And so the better you know that person, it builds on real life communication skills and your relationship with that person. So Rook and Bridge and maybe Pinochle as well, it will build this long-term relationship where people will play Bridge with the same partner for years and years and years, because the better you know that other human being, the better you get the game. It's not that you're better at the game, it's that you know them better and you develop a communication style together.
So maybe that's one of the reasons that Bridge is sort of so much in the zeitgeist, is that there's something very romantic about it, right?
Or romantic, and or what's the sensation where you go to IKEA? Relationship building. Like there's I don't know if Rook is romantic, but it is definitely strongly relational. Like, how could you do this? You let us down. I thought you understood me. It's built on communication and on strengthening your communication strength. And actually, Jason Slingerland and I are working on a 2-player game that tries to tap into that same feeling. of the better you are at communicating with the other person, and then eventually communicating within the specific rules of the game, the better you become at the game, where it's less about mastering the game and more about mastering unspoken communication with the other player. And so I think that's what makes those games special. I think that's what keeps people coming back to that game when the game itself is very simple, is that the more you play it with the other player, the better you and the other player become at talking when you can't talk, and being on the same wavelength. Speaking of being on the same mental wavelength, I see you have telepathic there.
Right. You're just making me think of telepathic a lot. And really, it's made as a 2-player game. But it does say 2+. I think in the same way you could play as teams, though I'm not sure if it explicitly tells you to do that. And you can play even this game with an odd number of people by having someone who doesn't know any of the goals guessing at the goals by watching what both of you are doing. And did you ever get a chance to play this? This one was you've never been to an in-person Protospiel, and I think he was done playtesting it by the time we had online. But this was this is like the mascot for Protospiel. This game was at Protospiel a lot for several years there. And Carl used it as part of he was going to grad school for UI UX. So he used it as part of his thesis or his graduation from getting his master's in UI UX. So and this is where you have a lose condition if you get too many things in a row. Like you have symbols and colors. One of you knows what color you do want to get in a row and you don't want to get in a row. And one of you knows what symbol you do and you don't want to get in a row of 3. And so you're handing each other cards for the way you can move the tiles based on what you're hoping happens. And so you have to infer from the way you can move the tile that you were given what they do or don't want you to do.
Yeah.
And if a third person is playing, they're the ones who are giving the command, the ways you can move the tiles. But so you could play it with 2 people knowing the color goal and 2 people knowing the shape goal.
Got it.
But no one can speak.
Yeah, that's fun. I like that. Oh, speaking of that, and to answer Baron's comment or just to respond to it, yes, Bridge as well as Rook, and he's saying Pinochle, there's this bidding phase at the beginning, and that's the communication I'm talking about, where you basically have to figure out collectively what your team can accomplish, and you set that goal up front. But to do that while only knowing half the information is the game. That's the challenge. And then the rest of the round is just trying to hit that target. Hearts works that way too. I think no spades.
No, there's no bidding on hearts.
No, I was thinking of spades. Yeah. That's the black heart, the upside down. Spades works that way too, where you set a goal. I think it's not points. I think it's a number of tricks taken. But again, it's with a partner, and the better you and your partner can predict how well you will perform, the better your outcome is, the better your points are. Hearts is a single player game, but still initially designed for 4 players.
Another one that is more modern, that's kind of a take on all of this, is The Crew, which is another cooperative game, a cooperative trick-taking game that isn't only possible at 4. I think you probably need at least 3, though. I don't have it right in front of me. I could look at it on BGG. But where your goals for who takes what tricks are changing constantly. So that's how it's a cooperative game.
That's interesting.
Even though it is a trick-taking game. Let me see what BGG says if it's 3 to 4. But I've played it 2 to 5 players. Okay. I've played it with 4 quite a bit. And I can imagine it would be easier, more interesting at 4. You do get, every time you play, you get randomly assigned specific cards. One will have to end up getting within a trick. So you have 1 deck of cards that you shuffle to give the assignment of your goal, and then the main deck of cards that you play with. So the more people you have, it just feels like the more flexibility you'll have to get the card to the place you want it to be.
Yeah.
but you can definitely still, there's some luck element involved in it. You can still just get dealt an impossible situation or a very difficult situation. It has four suits, and then it has just 4 rocket cards that are the trump, 1 through 4. Which are important for making what you need to happen. But the person who has the 4 in rockets is always the person who leads at the beginning. That's how you figure it out. So there's that nice elegance of it.
It surprised me to learn. Sorry, go ahead.
It's like a series of levels. That's the way in which it's not a legacy game because you don't do anything to destroy it, but it's a cooperative campaign game.
Huh.
Where there are like, I think either 50 or 100 levels, quite a few levels, that there's a different challenge each level. You can play it on BGA, very quick and snappy on BGA.
Okay.
Board Game Arena.
It surprised me. This may be news to some people in the industry, but anyone that's been playing a lot of newer games or does like board game testing probably knows this already, but it surprised me how much trick-taking games are alive and well in new game designers. I think I have played more trick-taking games that are in the playtest stage than I have of any other game genre. Maybe that's specific to Protospiel, but I don't think so. I think that's representative of like the last few years, at least the last few years of new game design. I think it's interesting that such an old mechanic that rolls all the way back to people's great grandparents playing bridge every Thursday night is still alive and well and captures the interests of game designers generations later. I think that's really cool.
My theory on that is that people got wise to trick taking is familiar to people who aren't yet gamers. So it's a good type of introductory mechanic. Because the type of people who like trick-taking games, well, they like interesting games, quote unquote, interesting games, right? Because it does feel like a trick-taking game is a little bit more rules heavy, even than something like poker, right? Poker strikes me as more of like a social, like there's a skill to it, definitely, of like starting to really be good at poker. You need to know all the odds and be good at reading people and other just like social skills to be really good at poker. But
is not in the rules itself. It's in the nature of the deck and probability and other players.
And you could just sit down and play poker really easily, but I can imagine
really badly.
Yeah, but you could participate and feel like you were following, whereas something like bridge, we don't even know how to play it, right? You and I are gamers, and we never learned it, though. You know what I mean? It's not something that anybody was like, oh yeah, let's just play bridge. No big. You know what I mean?
Everyone wants to make their own new bridge. It tickles me that something, it's especially in something that's as, I don't know, board game, the hobby seems pretty hip to me. It is a predominantly, maybe not even predominantly, but there's a lot of younger people in the design and in the user and the designer space. A lot of younger people play board games as a hobby. A lot of younger people are getting into the design. It has a lot of new and good and progressive ideas that come from a different generation. But then it has these mechanics that connect people, to people that lived through the Great Depression, where we might have so much different in our ideas about the world and perspective, but we can all agree that a game about taking tricks is a lot of fun, and we can use it to say something about the world. So I like when I see those connections through play that unite different groups of people. I think board games have done that really well. Especially in the last 10 years or so, the connection of bringing in people from different groups and worlds. But I like the generational connection there as well. That makes me happy.
Yeah, and maybe part of the reason you like stealing from old card games, or that being your favorite way to start a new design, Baron von Scump.
Maybe so. Yeah, they're tried and true. There's a good place to start there for sure.
Yeah, and I guess one other that neither of us are super expert in, and we maybe need Jay here for, but the whole idea of an asymmetric game like Root being best at 4, because all the factions then that were that the designer would have thought of and how they would interact with each other are there in the game. Whereas I've played Root one time 2-player because it was going to be, not even because I was playing with Will. It was actually at a convention, but just the person who had time to teach me, nobody else was available, and I was like, I want to learn this game. So he's like, I can do it. I'll pick the right 2 factions, right, so that it'll work at all. But it's the kind of thing that if you didn't know what you were doing,
you could really mess it up.
Yeah, you could have a really bad time depending on the factions. And there's a few different games like that also. Vast, I haven't played, but it's an asymmetric game where it's about a knight raiding a cave with a dragon, and the 4 factions, as I recall. The cave itself is 1 player, the dragon, the knight, and then like the goblins that live in the cave all have different goals, and the full experience, would be if all 4 factions were playing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Root is a game I've heard great things about that I've wanted to play. It's too expensive and too much of a time commitment to just pick up without getting some buy-in from other friends and family that want to play it with me. But but on a general level, with asymmetric gameplay, often those games are designed very carefully with a checks and balances or a rock paper scissors kind of relationship between the different asymmetric roles. And so when you have all of them in play, they naturally balance each other out and allow for a level and very interesting playing field. But if you strip half of those away, you might end up playing with just paper and rock. And
right.
Is just favored naturally. And so that can be an issue with scaling those down.
Yeah, I have another friend named Michael who I was just visiting with and was talking to me about Root, and that he and his game group, it's one of their very favorites, and it's one of his favorite type of game because everyone has to be engaged. Basically, someone will get really far ahead if everybody isn't watching, everybody isn't using their abilities to keep them in check. And also, he said there's this moment where you're like, well, I could really start laying the smack down, really start using my power to its greatest advantage. But will everybody notice that I'm doing that? Is it too soon to do that? Will I be able to push hard and get past the winning point? I think the goal is to get to 30 points in that game, if I recall. So, like, am I close enough to 30 points that I can make it before anybody smashes me down?
Yeah.
And he thinks that's a really fun decision.
That sounds like such a good time. I very much want to play this game at some point, so I'll look for an opportunity to do so.
Okay, well, I'm going to show you. You know what? I think that I want to laugh with you about how I created a completely ridiculous randomized board game.
Okay.
We'll quote do this challenge, but I think it's an actually physically impossible challenge because
holy crap.
The mechanic is trivia. And the constraint is no element of luck. I don't think that's possible because trivia is luck. It's like, do you get a question that is in your wheelhouse of knowledge? Right?
Okay, so let's try. So let's start with a luckless game. So chess is the most obvious idea. Any game where there's no hidden.
Right, no hidden information. If you wrote your own trivia questions, like you write the questions for yourself to answer, and then you get permission to answer them by using the mechanics. Like basically it's like a I get to show off what I know game, not really a trivia game.
Yeah, because trivia by its nature is random question, right? It's a test. It's
right.
You have to not know the question beforehand, or it's not a game anymore. But the very nature of a test is that it's random. Oh, what if it wasn't? What if it was a test? Would you say that a carefully designed exam is random information? What if everyone was given the same test and they had to complete it?
Yeah, you're allowed to study in advance.
Yeah,
basically, a trivia game with no element of luck is your final exam on any course.
That's what I'm saying. Like, basically, a history exam might meet the criteria. Wait, flash that back on the screen. Baron is helping us design this. Thank you,
So
Baron. What if the trivia had to do with the information available, like just things in the room? So not trivia as much as like observation. I've played this with my children every day at lunch. It's called I Spy. And I Spy is not really random, so actually that might work. Can you put the rules back on the screen?
Yeah, here you go.
All right, so I don't know what scroll is as far as the theme goes. And
yeah, I mean, I'm thinking like, you know, a message in a bottle scroll, like a, you know, a most decree scroll.
Points. I'm just gonna call that points. No element of luck. I mean, if you have to complete your history exam on a scroll, I think we meet the entire criteria. Right?
Yes.
Like the trivia is how well do you know the War of 1812? And you have to answer on a scroll, but everyone gets the same exam, so there's no randomness. Yeah, I think you've described the test.
But that's a memory game though, not a trivia game,
no,
right?
It's not. What's the difference between a memory game and a trivia game?
That you all had what you're saying, you all had access to the information in advance.
I've taken history exams where the information, I mean, like you've had access to the information for a trivia game too. The problem is that the topic is so broad, you didn't know what the questions would be.
Well, like not everybody has had the same access to the same information.
We do. It's in front of us. It's just we haven't all studied it.
Right.
I have
because we have Google.
Access to Kim Kardashian in the world, but I don't know it because I haven't studied it.
That's true, I guess.
So
I don't know. Google changes trivia so much. It used to be like, who knows the most trivial knowledge, the most unnecessary and unimportant.
That's what it used to be. But even trivia, in a way, was a memory game. Like that's Jeopardy is at its core. It's a memorization for the hardcore players. It's a memory game. I kind of like I Spy being the outcome of Baron's game too. Or I know that's not exactly what they mean. They're saying like, how observant are you? What if it was now we're into memory game again, but memory / trivia. What if it was one of those, you walk into a room and then someone puts a screen up and then they change 18 things and then you put it down and you have to, spot the difference, that kind of thing.
I played this at a baby shower. This is maybe the best, least cheesy, most interesting baby shower game I ever played, which was that they had a tray full of stuff, like some Scotch tape, a pen, blah, blah, blah. Yep. Oh, no, this was actually a trick, though. This was like, they punked us. I think they passed it around. We all are supposed to look at everything in this tray. And then they asked us, what was the person who gave you the tray wearing? Like, give me the most details.
Oh, there was a red herring.
What they were wearing,
That's a real Taskmaster kind of move right there. Like, misdirect you and then... Oh, man. That reminds me of one of my favorite, I guess group games would be the right term. Like, games you play with just any scalable number of humans to occupy them. Often something you would play with like school age kids. We have this game that I would play sometimes with like high schoolers and middle schoolers at our church. And the game is you just line everyone up into two groups and you have them in a line, and then you get a sheet and you hold the sheet between the two groups of humans, and then you shuffle everyone around so you don't know who's on the other side of the sheet. And then the two people that are orchestrating the game, they drop the sheet, and then you are left with two humans facing each other very abruptly. And the first one to say the name of the other person, their team gets a point. And it's like the panic response of being put on the spot. It is the best thing in the world to watch two best friends stare at each other in the face and stammer and not be able to get out the name of their best friend that's a foot away from them because of just the sudden the freeze. But it's also it's an icebreaker at its core, right? Because there's also going to inevitably be people who you don't know, and then you get to learn their name. So it's an icebreaker / game, which is just hilarious when two people that know each other can't come up with the name of the person they've known their entire life.
Is everybody wearing a name tag when playing this, so that if you don't know each other's name, you have a fallback? Or and
I forget exactly how to handle that, but it works as an icebreaker to learn their names too. I think like after 3 seconds, then someone else in your row can call out the name, and so you try and learn it, but you're also really incentivized to learn the other people's names because it'll loop around. And so that person who you didn't know at the start of the game, you're going to see them again, and you need to remember their name.
So you go in the same order from then on, or
no, it's a little
it seems
shuffle.
like you scramble every time. Yeah.
Not memory. It's actually a lot like Snorta, only instead of names in Snorta, you're trying to remember the animal noise to make. But it's the same concept. You put someone on the spot and you ask them to shout something out that should be easy, but the pressure makes it difficult. Anyway, that is a long way off from 4-player games, but very close to why I love games and why I love play.
Yeah, we're kind of like talking about the team game thing again here.
Mm-hmm. Well,
you better get back to work.
Soon, a little over time. Actually, I have one more thing. I wanted to make an announcement. I haven't told anyone yet in the game design space, but I represent
breaking news.
Breaking news here on Proto Online Twitch only. Oh, eventually other places. So I have represented the new designer in our trio of UI and J, and I still very much am that. But as of this week, I am officially I don't even know what the right term would be. A published designer, maybe? I have signed my first contract for a game that I made.
Yay!
So
can you say which one?
I can say which one. I can't. I can't talk about who the publisher is or anything like that. But I have signed a contract for Crowded Kitchen, which is a 4-player and more and less speed game about building recipes really quickly. And that's a big milestone for me as a designer. It means I was able to make something that not only play tested well and that other designers really enjoyed and like to play, but that a company that that creates games and sells them to other people thought that it was good enough to work as a product as well, and they're going to help me get that game in the hands of way more people than I as an individual could do. So that's really exciting for me.
Is it? Do you know if it's going to stay about food and still be about a kitchen?
It's it will probably there's a lot of details to the contract that depend on who they work with, and if there's a third party, it could get licensed, and so that is left as flexible. But I know that the core gameplay is going to remain the same, so it will definitely still be about grabbing parts to recipes and trying to build it quickly.
Right, but whether it's food or robots or something else that you're making, it could be anything.
We didn't really clarify that too much, and I'm okay with it changing. That's been, for that game, that's been something I've been open to since I started making it, because it was a game based on, actually, to Baron's point, I started that game with the idea of what if I tried to make a real-time sped-up version of an old classic game that I used to play with my grandparents, which was slow and took hours and hours. And I said, what if everyone played it all at once? And that's how I eventually ended up at that game.
Which game was that you used to play?
It was based on Shanghai Rummy. Most people are familiar with the modern equivalent of Shanghai Rummy, which is Phase 10. Phase 10 is Shanghai Rummy almost to a T, but with a custom deck of cards. And if you play Phase 10, you probably hate it because no one ever finishes it because it takes forever.
It's a hassle. It is a hassle. It's like you just feel frustrated the whole time.
But it's a game about collecting sets and contracts. And I was like, what if you did that, but in reverse, and you had to build recipes with them? And so I started by basically making Shanghai, but about cooking and recipes. And that idea sucked. But the beauty of playtesting is you can keep following the elements that were fun. And it got rebuilt into like a reskin of another classic game. Nerds, and then not Nerds. Nerds, which is another old card game, and then it became its own thing and its own identity, and now it's going to get published, which is really cool. So wanted to tell you that, wanted to tell our audience that. Very excited.
So funny that I've play tested it and it didn't even occur to me that it was like Phase 10 in any way, right? So that's pretty cool. And so happy for you. Very excited. I have your, it's up there. I'm not going to get up and get it, but I have your Game Crafter version up there. So.
That's right. Yep. That was my first delve into any kind of self-publishing, but that was mostly just to kind of understand how that works. I never wanted to take that to Kickstarter and try and print 1,000 copies myself. It's just, I don't think it's a strength I should lean into. And I just wanted to keep making games. And so I went to try and find a publisher instead.
Even though we're over time, I bet it's a question that people watching this later might have.
Yeah.
Do you think that doing that crowd sale helped you get signed? Or do you think it caused problems or indifferent?
I don't think that the publisher I met with knows the crowd sale exists. And I don't think they care either way. I don't.
Okay.
I do think it helped. And the reason I think it helped is it let me be more invested in my own game. I think if I got it to the point where I got it,
believed in it more.
crowd scale. Yep. I got it to that point. I believed in it, but I think I would have been done with it once I got it to that point because I thought it was finished. And then I did a crowd sale and I got it in the hands of about 30 different people, mostly friends and family that I knew, but or game designers, but other people that could physically own it. And I ended up with 5 copies myself, and that made it even easier to keep pitching those out. And as part of the crowd sale, I got it in the hands of a professional reviewer. And so I got all of this new feedback from different groups of people and a renewed investment in my own game because of the time and effort I put into making it look good. A lot of game designers will tell you not to put too much time or money or effort into a prototype. And if you are trying to do this for optimal financial return, I would completely agree with that feedback. But it's been my experience that getting from no published game to your first published game, it helps a lot to believe in the game or games you're working in. And so I paid a couple $100 for artwork on a prototype that in no way I don't think influenced anyone's ability to want to play it or sell it, but it made me care more about my own game, and it pushed me towards excellence in other elements of the game, like game design, that did translate, I think, into a publishing contract. So I think it did help, but not because of visibility, but just because it kept me engaged in my own game and gave me access to more feedback than I would have otherwise gotten it. So I'm glad that I pursued that.
Yeah, and you took it down. It's not for sale on the Game Crafter anymore, and I guess that's why you didn't feel like it was necessary to remind these people that it was possible to buy it another way before, because it's a very small number considering the scale that they're going to go with of people who ever had access to it. But it helped you get prototypes cheaper too, is another thing that happened there.
True. Gave me access to some prototypes.
And you did make a little bit of money, probably, right?
Yes, not anywhere close to what I spent making the version of it, but
every little bit helps. Like it's like that money you made is also a little bit like a discount on your prototypes or whatever. Yeah.
The money that I made was trivial through Game Crafter. The self-confidence that I gained was immeasurable.
Oh, wow.
That was by far the most important part to me personally.
That's like a quote they need on their website. I think maybe it sounds kind of negative though, so I don't know, but it's just true, right?
I think they'll be the first. JT and the team would be the first to tell you that the Game Crafter is not a side hustle for people to earn money. There's a few exceptions, but it's not.
Right.
That's not a way for you to go make a living or even an income. But it is what they're about is getting the idea from your head and turning it into a product you can share with other people and
making it real.
And I think that has been their market and their success. And I think that's what most people that use them as a service are interested in. I've looked at their metrics, and by far most people on there have made exactly one game. And they're not there to do constant releases of additional games, and they haven't become lifelong designers, and they haven't put out a bunch of successful crowd sales on the Game Crafter. But they went to the Game Crafter and they turned an idea into a game, and maybe they made $15 on it. I don't know, but they got to make a game, and someone else, maybe someone they never met before, played it. And that, I think for a lot of people, that's an initial measure of success. So
I think
it's great. I'm very happy.
For myself, and as I move forward with businesses other than Protospiel Online that I might work on, I can definitely see the Game Crafter being a component of a larger business plan, right? That helps it work. But yeah, being the only thing you do, very unlikely to pay. I don't know that there's anybody that actually, even the people who do a really good job on the Game Crafter, that's all they do and they're able to make a living, right?
Yeah.
They have like the guy who makes Gate and everything, as far as I know, he's a plumber and he's good at it and he doesn't want to stop doing it.
Yeah.
So it's
game design as a career is rare for anyone, even people like Jason Glover, who are very good at it and have been very successful. But also the Game Crafter as a company, their focus, I believe, and you can check, but my experience, their focus is helping people make 5 to 10 copies of a game. And the fact that they're excellent at doing that means that they're not as good as a focused publisher at making 3,000 copies of a game. They can still do that, and they will still give you a discount for printing in bulk, but they are probably not. They're certainly not the only option when you get to that level of scale, but they are one of the best options for making 5 to 10 of anything that I've ever seen, which is what drove me there initially as a designer. I think that's their niche, and I think that's what they excel at.
Well, this is where the Game Crafter sponsoring Protospiel Online got a really big sponsor spot. I don't have their logo I can pop up over your face, but yes.
They are a big part to make my first game, which so yeah, I'm very grateful to everyone that works there and for what they do and what they provide to gamers. So thank you, Game Crafter, for that.
Yes, thank you. And yes, they help us a lot with Protospiel Online. They give a really kind gift of a sanity test to anybody who really participates a lot in our giveaways. So if you want to get help with your rule book, that's something that they provide for our really active participants in Protospiel Online.
That is valuable. Rule books are hard to write.
Yes, totally. All right. Well, so we're going to be on hiatus for sure, at least until September. When Table Talk comes back, it might be in a different form. It might not be on Twitch at all, or it might be on Twitch in a different way where it's not weekly content. So we're talking about those things behind the scenes. And certainly if you're watching this and you have opinions or feedback, if you're in our Discord, you can talk to us in the suggestions channel. If you're not, you can use the contact form on protospiel.online/contact to tell us what you think about how it's been so far or what you'd like to see differently, because we will be talking in these 2 months about how we want to come back and whether it will be exactly in the same way. It's relatively unlikely to be exactly in the same way, to be honest with you. So, but we'll see. We'll definitely see each other again, Michael. I think we do want to keep making this content, but the exact form might evolve by the fall.
Just like playtesting and designing a game, you want to try different things. You want to see what you excel at, what you enjoy, and what other people seem to like. So give us, you are our playtesters. Give us your feedback. Tell us what you enjoy about this and what you'd want to see more of. And we will try and design our content around that.
Yes. Thanks very much, everybody. And we'll see you on the other side.
Bye.